Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming. It's nice to have such a boisterous crowd. Don't get too boisterous, please. Welcome to another Max Weinreich Center YIVO Institute Fellowship Lecture. Before we begin, I'd just like to say that in order for us to bring you these wonderful and informative fellowship lectures, we always need your support. So if you like what you hear, and I'm sure you will, please consider making a donation at some point to the YIVO. Today's lecture is Ofer Dynes. Ofer is an assistant professor in the program of Yiddish Studies, as well as in the Department of Jewish History and Contemporary Jewry at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Prior to his appointment at the Hebrew University, he was the Ethel Flegg Postdoctoral Research Fellow in Jewish Studies at McGill University. In September 2016, he earned his PhD with distinction from Harvard University, and he's currently completing a book manuscript entitled The Fiction of the State, The Polish Partitions and the Beginning of Modern Jewish Literature, 1772 to 1848. Professor Dynes is the 2018-2019 recipient of the Workmen Circle Dr. Emanuel Patt Visiting Professorship in Eastern European Jewish Studies at the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research. And his topic today is a Jewish king of Poland for one night on the Polish-Jewish royal dynasty that never was. Before we begin, he has a bit of music he'd like to play, so we're going to start with that. But please welcome Professor Ofer Dynes.
Hi, everyone. Eddie, thank you very much for welcoming me. Thank you very much for YIVO for making this happen. I'm very grateful. And thank you all for being here. I'm excited to finally present my project. Just to set us in the mood for all these kings and queens and royalty that we're about to discuss, I'm going to play 2 minutes from an opera by Vivaldi called A King for One Day, which clearly has a direct relationship to today's talk. So just for us to be in the mood. Okay. I did this mostly because I'm a specialist. I specialize in Eastern Europe, and you don't always get this opportunity to play music and opera and to talk about Italy and palaces. So this is really, really a joy to do that. And before I begin, because this is such a special topic to me personally, but also in Jewish history, I'm very curious to know. I know that there are some descendants of the Wahl family, of Saul Wahl. Would you mind raising your hand if you're related to Wahl? I'm not, but so there's a good number. That's good to know. Yes, I have a lot to say about you in a couple of minutes. Yes. But before we do that, I want to just remind ourselves. I'm sorry, that is not what I wanted to do. Eddie, I may need your help with starting the PowerPoint, please. Can you just...
Oh, here, let's...
Okay, so for the rest of you who are not Wahl's descendants, or also for everyone, this is in a sense a big topic, but also a very minor one. It's minor in the sense that we're going to talk about that legend that wasn't 100% true, let's put it this way. And also we're here going to talk about the tradition which was important for one family, a prominent Ashkenazi family, one of the elite of Ashkenazi Jewry, but yet it is really one legend and one family. And the question is, why would that matter? So before I start my talk, I want to show you the big picture and show why I think this topic is important for people who are interested in Jewish history and history in general. Eddie, are you having any success with that?
No,
here we are.
It's here, but it's
frozen, so maybe the other Eddie would be help.
Yeah, let me go get it.
Yes.
Okay, Sorry about that.
So, first, what is interesting to me here, this is a legend, as we're going to in just a second, about Jew who was elected as king of Poland for one night. And this is a legend authored by Jews about Polish politics. And what is interesting to me here is that this is a way to look at politics from below or from outside. Now, I have this insight, and you may agree or disagree with me, we'll discuss it after. I really have this insight that the people who understand politics and the mechanics of politics the most are those who come from the outside, those who are actually external to the political system. Why is that? Mostly because they are really dependent on this system. And what I enjoy the most as an historian is to take these internal Jewish traditions about politics, about European politics, and to show that they are not reductive or simplistic or based on misunderstandings of European politics, but rather the opposite, that they are the most insightful and the wisest way to think about political mechanisms. And I think that Saul Wahl's story is a fantastic example of this insight. The other thing that is interesting to me and to us here is the way Jews are related to non-Jewish categories of power. Now, this is a whole discussion out there about what it means for a Jew to be a king. Now, without simplifying the debate too much, you can imagine that no lullaby in Yiddish would say, my son Yankele, when you grow up, you will become a Kozak, right? This was not part of the how Jews have imagined.
It's working.
Oh, fantastic. Here it's done. Thanks. So here we are.
If you don't use the microphone, we're not going to record it.
Okay, so I'm going to stick here. So the other thing has to do with Jews and non-Jewish categories of power. And this is an interesting example in which Jews have actually imagined what it meant for a Jew to be a king, if only briefly, if only for one night. So this is going to be central to our discussion. And third, it has to do with genealogy and belonging. What did it mean for Jews, for a Jewish family to imagine that its predecessors were claimant to the Polish throne? So these are just, the three big things that I want to put out there. Now, just a very quick timeline. I'm going to move back and forth in the 16th century into the present. So just to make things slightly clearer, and this is okay. This is not. I'm just going to say it quickly. Saul Wahl died in 1617. He was a historical figure we're going to discuss in just a second. So when we discuss Saul Wahl, we're in the realms of the 17th century. The first time we find this legend in writing, that we have a document of this legend, is in a book authored by Pinchas Katzenellenbogen, the descendant of Saul Wahl, the sixth generation removed of Saul Wahl, and he lived in the 18th century. And in the 19th century, we're going to get to Dynes Samuel, who was a British baron and a descendant of Saul Wahl. He made this legend accessible for everyone. So this is going to be the arc of my talk. So just so we have a good sense of 17th, 18th, and 19th century, and why do I want to make this distinction visible to us? Just to remind ourselves that this 1773, Poland was an autonomous monarchy. Between 1773 and 1795, Poland is occupied, partitioned by neighbors, and it doesn't exist any longer. So when you talk about the meaning of being a Polish Jewish king in the 19th century, you say that in a time when there are no longer Polish kings. And that is central to our discussion. This distinction between Poland as an independent state and partitioned Poland, which is taken over and is not independent any longer. So I want this to have us in our mind. And finally, if we cover the timeline, we also want to cover, that is not good. I'm sorry, I'm going to show you a map in just a second. Nothing happened, right? I'm really sorry about this interruption. The map is showing on my computer. Yeah. So I know it's so weird. I'm sorry, all kind of technical dramas. So I know it works here, but not there.
It's just strange it doesn't.
Oh, okay.
It changed?
It did change, right?
Oh.
Here you are. Okay, so this is a map of Poland in the 16th century. And I want to show you this map because it's going to help us imagine distances. We're going to talk about a family that was moving from Italy to Poland, which in our mind sometimes appear to be totally separate. But look at the map. This is Krakow, and this is Venice. So it's important, this is Venice. So it's important to see that the distance between Krakow and the Principality of Venice is not as large, not as distant as from two other points inside of the Polish territories. So for some regions in Poland, Italy is actually closer. The other thing that I want you to notice is the fact that Poland is very northern and is adjacent to Scandinavia. So these are the two spheres we're going to discuss in terms of political and intellectual influence. Italy and Scandinavia, so you can see just how it is laid out geographically. Fantastic, so we covered that. And this talk is divided into three parts. First, I'm going to say a few words about historians and this legend. Then I'm going to move to the legend in its historical context. And finally, I'm going to talk about the descendants and what it meant, what this legend meant to the descendants of Saul Wahl. So we have three parts. That's how we're going to go on today. So historians and the legend. Usually, as an historian, people are trained to start talks or conversation articles by saying, no one has ever paid any attention to this phenomenon. I'm the first person to do that, right? That's the way you frame yourself when you want to appear innovative. This is an unusual case in the sense that there was actually a lot of attention drawn to the legend of Saul Wahl in a very specific context. You with that?
I want you to be by the microphone so
Oh,
they
yeah.
can record.
So I guess I'm going to do yes. Thanks for reminding me. So this is an unusual case because there was this interest among Polish Jewish historians in the late 19th, early 20th century about this legend. There was a funny event that actually drew attention to this legend in 1880. There was a Polish Jewish girl in a classroom that was not behaving very nicely. And when the teacher scolded her, she said, you cannot scold me because I am the descendant of Polish kings and you're just a teacher, right? And this drew a lot of attention. It was covered in the magazine and newspapers. And this also drew the attention of Meir Balaban, the notable Jewish historian, who was one of the first to actually pay attention to this legend. And he tried to figure out what was going on. Why would Jews say that there was this Jewish king for one night, Saul Wahl? And Meir Balaban writes in one of his, he got back to this many times, in one of the articles he said, until I actually was granted access to the archives, I couldn't provide a definitive answer. I mean, we could say yes and no, but until we see the archives, we don't have any sense of what really happened. Now, obviously, it sounds ludicrous that there was a king anywhere who ruled only for one night. How could that possibly be? The thing is that the Polish political system was rather unstable, and there was this other famous story that was actually true about a French Polish king who only ruled for 2 months. His name is, in Polish, Henry Waleczny, or in French, Henri Valois. If you read The Three Musketeers, he appears in The Three Musketeers. He's rather famous. This was this prince who was a claimant to the French throne in the 1560s. The thing is that he was the fourth son of Henry II. So if you are the fourth son, you need your three other brothers to die. To die in order to inherit the throne. So he was not very hopeful about that. And then he was offered the Polish throne. He spent a little slightly shorter than 2 months in Warsaw as the Polish king, and he just apparently couldn't take it anymore. So he absconded at night without telling anyone. So this is a true story. He just couldn't take it anymore. So he went to Paris and never got back. It just was the end of it. And so this is a true story. So Just so as to have that in mind. So it wasn't so implausible to have all the kind of funny situations. So with that in mind, Balaban went to the archives, and what he's discovered is that Shaul Wahl was definitely an historical figure. Not only that, he was an incredibly important Jewish merchant and philanthropist. He was really one of the most notable Jews of his time. The only thing is that he was not a king. He was not a king, but he was awarded personal privileges from 2 Polish kings because he was so wealthy and important. So he was really as important as Jews were in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. I cannot think of, it is very, no, it's not true, but I cannot, it's very unusual for a Jew to have 2 privileges from 2 different kings from 2 different dynasties. It means that he was not only close to one king in a dynasty, but actually was prominent enough to create connections with 2 different dynasties. Shaul Wahl became so prominent because he was selling salt in the mines of Wilecka in the south. Maybe some of you have been to Wilecka. These mines exist to this day. This is how he made this enormous wealth. So just to give you a little sense of Shaul Wahl as a historical figure, so these are documents from the Lithuanian Metrica, meaning the Lithuanian laws that were published. This is actually the manuscript. They were published in the early 20th century in Russian. And I'm sure that some of you may read Russian, or at least the Russian letters. I mean, you can see this it's in declination, but this is Shaul Yudish, which actually means Shaul Wahl. So you don't need to, I mean, today it's in Google Books, right? I mean, but at the time, Balaban was the first to decipher this manuscript and to find documents related to Shaul Wahl. But that's not all. Not only we have documents in which we actually know of Shaul Wahl in this official Metrica. In addition, there are objects that belong to Shaul Wahl that have survived. Now, if we were to do this talk in Jerusalem, we would actually bring you the physical object, which is stunning. This is at the National Library of Israel. This is purported to be Shaul Wahl's personal Bible scroll. I took this picture, right? It really is it's tiny. It's beautiful. And I don't know if you can see, I mean, I'm worried you cannot, but if you come closer to the screen, you could see, I can see that it says Shaul, and then there's a Wahl here. This is a 2 Vavs, Aleph, and Lamed. Can you see it from here? Yeah. So, again, I don't know whether Shaul Wahl actually was the person who wrote that on his scroll, but this came from his descendants in London, and to my mind, this is authentic. And bear in mind that this is not some mythical figure from the first century. This is 16th century person, so it's not so rare to have objects that came down to us from that area. In 1887, there was actually an exhibition in London devoted to Shaul Wahl, among other Jewish personas, and there they actually showed a much greater number of objects related to him. He had a coat of arms and all kind of stuff. So this, I think, I haven't checked yet, but I think that these objects are in London in the Jewish Museum now. So this is the only object that I saw personally, but there is apparently a little bit more out there. So this really needs to give us a sense of that this Shaul Wahl was a really historical figure, and it left us some tangible elements and some of his objects. Not only that, there was actually, until World War II, there was a Shaul Wahl synagogue in Lublin, and this is Alter Katzizne, the famous writer and photographer who took this picture in 1923. We don't have any other picture that I know of from inside the synagogue. But this is a synagogue that was named after Shaul Wahl in Lublin, very far, both from Lithuania and from Krakow, which only shows how important he was across Poland. There was another synagogue dedicated to him in Brisk, his hometown in Lithuania. And this is an interesting and also sad story. When the Russians built a temple on this synagogue, they found all kind of inscriptions on the wall related to Shaul Wahl and his descendants. So we don't have that, but we do have the transcriptions from what was written on the wall. So we do know that there was actually a Shaul. This may have been the synagogue where Shaul Wahl himself prayed. So he may be distant from us right now, but this was a real historical figure with, again, very tangible traces that were left in Poland and around the world. So with that in mind, we can go to the actual legend about Saul Wahl and the way he was elected and what it meant at the time and what it means for us now. Do you guys want to sit, or this is a good time to make a pause? And I feel like there are two seats over there. So hopefully more descendants of Saul Wahl. I mean, I'm not sure.
I think my mother's primary care physician, his last name is Katzenellenbogen.
So good chances they are related. This is
I'm going to give her the flyer. She couldn't come to
too bad. I mean, thanks for representing her. So the first time in which we hear about Saul Wahl in historical documents is from 2 or 3 passages from this book that I hold in my hand right now. It's called Yesh Manchilin, or those who bequeath. It's not the most popular name, so I'm going to stick to the Hebrew, Yesh Manchilin, which was authored by Pinchas Katzenellenbogen in the 18th century, in the 1750s. This is now a printed book, but it was not available for many years. In fact, the first edition came out in 1984, and this edition is not scholarly. If you were to compare that to the original manuscript, you'll see that this is, it contained 80% of the manuscript and is 70% accurate. But it's actually, if you were to read the introduction, it's a lovely story. This is a Holocaust survivor from Hungary in his 90s who would go to Oxford and would decipher. That is the project he took upon himself when he reached the age of 90. And this is really beautiful. And he wrote that his wife was not granted permission to enter the Bodleian Library. Today, everyone can get her. But at that time, that was not the case. And she would wait outside in the snow. And this really is a beautiful and heartbreaking story. And he's the person who made this available. So, oftentimes, I'm not satisfied with this as a scholar, but I feel it's an amazing thing. And, it's very helpful. It's amazing that we have that. But until 1984, this manuscript was not available, with the exception of these snippets that relate to Saul Wahl. So we should have that in mind. In just a second, I'm going to tell you who was Pinchas Katzenellenbogen and what he wrote this story. But before that, why don't I give you a taste of the legend itself? Just to be out of curiosity, who has heard about this legend from all kinds of sources? Okay, that's fantastic. From the Mishpocha, that is incredible. That is absolutely fantastic. So I'm not going to, because, I'm not going to read this in Hebrew, and I'm not going to test your patience reading the whole manuscript. I'm going to read one passage, and the rest I'm just going to tell you, I'm going to summarize it very quickly. So this manuscript, I'm holding the book, but if you were to see the manuscript, the first page is a letter that Pinchas Katzenellenbogen receives from his father. We don't know how this correspondence originated, because we don't have the rest of the correspondence. But the first letter is from the author's father, addressed. I'm sorry, I make it too complicated. It's a letter from the author's father who says, "Son, you ask me about the names of our ancestors. And here is a list, and these are the notable people that you need to remember of. And the rest of the story is about these notable family members, along with other stuff. And at a certain passage, the author arrives at this historical moment and tells us about Saul Wahl. It goes like this. I heard from my father and teacher the following story. Saul was beloved by the great nobles of Poland and important in their eyes. When the king of Poland dies, the custom of the great noble is to congregate to erect a king. Before they vote, they establish a specific date in which it was prescribed that they have to erect a king on that day. And when the day has come and they voted, they could not decide who will rule. That man say this and that man say that, until the evening. In order not to breach the law and not to elect a king, they all agreed and voted unanimously that Saul Wahl would be a temporary king for that day and night. They crowned him temporarily, and he was king all that night, and they followed all the royal rituals. My father told me that they placed at his disposal all the books of laws. Saul Wahl wrote many enactments and decrees for the welfare of the Jews. I have forgotten those that my father told me, except of one, a decree ordering that one who murders a Jew should suffer the death penalty. The death penalty. If someone kills a Jew, he cannot be released by ransom, but will be killed. That's a punishment. And the day after, the nobles agreed upon a candidate and elected a king. So this really is a short, succinct paragraph that tells us about how Saul was elected. And now you may want to ask why Saul and not someone else. Well, he goes on to tell the story about Saul's father, who was a prominent rabbi in Padua, and this is true, this is historically true. And according to the legend, this is the part which is legendary, not true, this father of Saul became a friend of YIVO, which is the name of a Polish noble who traveled to Italy and lost all of his possessions while he was traveling throughout Europe. So he reached out to the local rabbi because he knew as a Polish noble that rabbis would be open to lending money to Polish nobles, which is 100% true. And he reached out to him discreetly, and Saul's father obliged, and he helped him out. So this is legend number 2, why they became close. And the father said, listen, I have a son in Lithuania. He wanted to study in a yeshiva there. Why don't you adopt him? Why don't you help him? And this is how Saul Wahl became connected to Polish nobility. So far, so good. So why Saul? So there are some linguistic hints in the text itself, and some that I saw in the correspondence after that give us some hints why Saul was associated with this kind of legends. I tell you why I think this has happened. Just want to show you the manuscript because it's stunning. Also, I want to show you the Bodleian library. This is when you work on this manuscript and then you lift your eyes and you see this beautiful stunning view. So that's what I was doing there, and you can see that this is. I think it's visible, right? It's a Saul Wahl. Saul is a different name than Saul. That's a different problem that we need to be accountable of as historians. Saul Wahl, Melech Lefisha. Can you see that? Yeah, that's fantastic. So you can see this is the manuscript, and there it says Yesh Malchim. So this is the manuscript, just to get a sense of the texture of the text. So why Saul as a king? If this was a class, I would open it to discussion. So Saul was, in Hebrew, Bechur Vatov, which Baal HaMetzudot, which is this one of the most popular exegesis to the Torah, says was elected and good. Bechur, from the Hebrew lexeme of livchor bachar, to choose. So there was actually an exegesis that connected the King Saul with the idea of being elected. And if you think about that in the Bible, King Saul is the closest one to actually being elected, right? They're casting a lot, as opposed to the other dynasties, David dynasties, right? Saul is a dynasty of one person. There's no continuation to that. And he was actually elected. And so it may be the case that this is one of the reasons why Saul Wahl was associated with the notion of being elected. Now, having that in mind, we need to go back to the legend and see what it tells us about Polish politics. And this is what we have in my mind. I promise this may be, I'm going to be as clear as possible. We are going to delve into 16th century the Polish political system. It's convoluted, I know, but I'm going to be very, very clear. What is really interesting about Poland at the time is that it was distinct for the following reason. You had these two political institutions. The first, that it was an elective monarchy, and the other is that the political system operated by the concept of liberum veto. I'm going to get to the liberum veto in just a second. I'm going to say a few words about elective monarchy, the idea that the king was elected by the nobles. If you were to visit Central and Northern Europe in the 16th century, this would not have been an exception at all. This was the Scandinavian norm. In Denmark, in Norway, and in some of the northern German principalities, the kings were chosen, elected by the local nobles, and did not inherit their throne. That was the common political system because it was deemed more democratic and better than the other alternatives. In the 17th century, Poland has become an exception. Kings across Scandinavia were overthrown, those were elected, and dynasties were established. So when we talk about Katzenellenbogen's time, the time when this book was authored, Poland seemed very weird, but that was not the case just a century before. Now, this idea of electing the king was imagined to be increasingly problematic in the 17th century. You can think why. This really creates all this tension and an equilibrium every time that when a king dies, there is this uncertainty who's going to come next, and this is a time of great vulnerability to the state. So you can see why this has weakened the Polish Commonwealth considerably every time a king has died. And some historians in the 19th century have argued that this is the reason why Poland was ultimately partitioned by its neighbors, because of its internal weakness. But on the other hand, we can see it as something beautiful, right? This is not a full democracy. This is what we call in Latin a forma mixta, meaning that this is also, to an extent, a democracy. 10% of the residents of Poland, meaning the nobles, and many of them were able to elect their king. If you compare that to the British Parliament, again, a contemporary institution, this is akin to the number, to the percentage of people who could elect for the British Parliament. So in a sense, if in this specific political mechanism, Poland and England were comparable. And I'm showing you this drawing, which I like very much, because this is one, it's constructed by Federal, and it imagines what it meant to elect a king. It means that there are these are the nobles who elect the king. They are physically holding the throne together with the king. So it's not just one person who holds the throne. There's a whole bunch of people who are of different proximities, physical proximities to the throne itself. So this really captures the notion of an elective monarchy in the eyes of the residents of Poland at the time. I absolutely love it. Can you see it right in the back? Yes, it's magnificent. The other principle that I want to tell you very briefly about is the liberum veto. Liberum veto means very simply a veto, that meaning a decision by consensus. It means not that the majority rules, but that everyone needs to agree in order for a political action to take place. And this was based on the fear that I think we all share, which has to do with the tyranny of the majority, right? This is something that no matter what your political belief is, you all expect at one time, meaning that the majority takes over and doesn't allow the minority to voice their concern. So this is the idea of a liberum veto in Poland. In order to reach an agreement at the parliament, you need to convince everyone to agree. And if there was one person who didn't agree, it meant that this decision could not carry through. And this has happened many times. In fact, from 280 Seims, meaning 280 sessions, 150 parliaments ended up with this situation of a liberum veto. So this has become an increasingly common situation to the extent that it really petrified the political system. So clearly now we can see why this is a problem, but we can all see why it's beautiful, right? Why it was deemed important by some people. Now, why I'm telling you all this? First, because these are really the two political tenets which are the basis of Saul Wahl's legend. And also because this is relevant to the discussion about the reforms that some people thought were needed in order for Poland to function better in the 17th century. There were the royalists, who thought that you should abolish the liberum veto, abolish the idea of an elective monarchy, and making Poland as a normal dynasty. and they were all as opposed to those who supported the nobles. Meaning we thought that you should keep these mechanisms intact. So what's so interesting about this is that those who supported the king tell to what kind of an authority? They tell to the Bible, to the book of Samuel, saying in the Bible the Hebrews were promised a king, and this is how Shaul came to the stage, right? That's the fulfillment of the promise. And Shaul was not able to create a dynasty, but from Shaul on we have a Hebrew dynasty. And those who turned to maintaining the power of the nobles said, hold on, why don't we look at Venice or at Rome, no, I'm sorry, or Venice, to a place where the Doge is being elected and where this liberal veto is being in use. We should model ourselves after this old principle of a city-state where there is the kind of like a proto-monarchy. Why is this interesting to us? Because, in a sense, Saul Wahl was, in a sense, represented both sides of the argument. Why do I mean by that? First, he was Shaul, the Hebrew king, right, in the flesh. And for Paul didn't write about Saul Wahl, but you often see that in Polish political texts at the time, that a Jew come with this biblical name, and Paul think of the biblical king. And he would go to the church and pray up to King David, right? So this idea of a Shaul was that, so I think this is something that we need to be minded of when you read this legend. The other thing is that Saul Wahl was also, as we said, came from Padua, came from Italy. So he also represented this alternative model of a Jew who is actually a representative of the Italian system. And if you were to read the political literature at the time, there are so many political plays in which there is a discussion among people, and suddenly some kind of person from Italy says, you know, in Italy actually we do this, in actually in Italy we do that, in Italy we have a liberal veto. So the idea of an Italian who's coming to the Polish royal court and as a person from the outside and voicing his critique convincingly, unconvincingly, was rampant, was very common. For example, this is a conversation about election and freedom in the law between a Pole and an Italian. And I know this is an exaggeration, but there are like 50 or 60 tractates like that. So you can see why this idea of the Italian notion was so strong and so important. So my point here is that the legend about Saul Wahl is not just a legend, it participated in a much larger discourse about the fate of the Polish politics and what's going to happen to them. So it really made us think differently of what this legend meant, both for the Katzenellenbogen family and also for Jews as a whole, and perhaps also for Poland, for Europeans in general. So we said it's important, it relates to larger discourse, but now we need to think, as I like to say, toughness-wise, meaning what does it actually mean? What does this legend actually say about Jews and Polish politics? So my reading of the legend is the following. My understanding, and I think this is incredibly insightful, is that the point of this legend is that Jews are better off in Poland as long as the Polish political system is dysfunctional, as long as it fails. Saul Wahl would have never been elected for king for any period amount of time if it wasn't for the fact that the Polish nobles could not have agreed on a single king, and because of this idea of a liberal veto, the idea that you need to reach a consensus. And this is, I mean, it's heartbreaking if you seriously think about it. The idea that Jews can only prosper in places that were less centralized and less effective politically. How are we doing it in terms of time? 3:40. I have like 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Okay, good. So I just want to put it out there that this is a text that comes from the Katzenellenbogen family, which is an interesting thing. I'm just going to say these two sentences. What was the actual experience of the Katzenellenbogen family? This is a family that lived in Poland for generations, and they had this consciousness that they are the descendants of Polish kings and queens and claiming to the Polish throne. And also, some members of the family had to flee from Poland in 1699 because because they were accused of a blood libel. So this is a family that is both affirm themselves that they are part of a Polish Jewish dynasty, and also people that flee as refugees to the German principalities. So you can imagine this experience of living in Poland in a place that on one hand there was anti-Semitism anywhere, but legally Jews were much better off, and moving to Germany when actually anti-Semitism was much less conspicuous and evident, and yet Jews were much worse off because the political system was much more efficient. So this is a very weird experience, and I think that this legend really captures this experience. I would say brilliantly. I mean, I read many political tractates of the time, and really, this is like one passage that really says something so wise and meaningful about Polish politics. So that's why it's so important and dear to me. It's not only important and dear to me; it was also important and dear to the descendants of. We're going to get to it in just a second. I'm just going to put, just a sentence. So one thing I'm doing is going over the archival collections of the Katzenellenbogen family. And what I see there very clearly is that they were not happy or open about this. It was about this family legend, family tradition. In fact, there are letters from father to son, from the father of Pinchas Katzenellenbogen, the author, to his son, saying, you know what it means to be a king of kings. You need to be very cautious. And then these are rabbis, right? So they held sermons in which they speak very badly about King Saul and what it meant. So they're really worried and preoccupied about this family tradition. So it's not a matter of pride to them at all at a certain political point. Why I'm telling you all this? Because the reason why this legend has attracted some attention recently is that Rossman, who's a professor at Bar-Ilan, wrote this book called How Jewish is Jewish History, and he argues that this is an example of Jews adhering, or Jews thinking of themselves in terms of Polish political categories of power. Jews think of themselves as kings, and this is true, and may have been true when this legend was first told, when the Polish Little Commonwealth was independent. But we don't know that, we don't have any documents, but the legend was recorded at the time when Jews no longer had this kind of consciousness. So it really represents something slightly different. So we are left with the question, what did this legend actually mean? And when did Jews come to like the idea of being the descendants of kings? And when did they come to speak so highly about being the descendants of Saul Wahl, the way this student in Leber told the teacher, right? So there is a shift of a consciousness. The question, when did that happen, in what context, right? Not in the Katzenellenbogen context, not in the context of Yesh Manchilin. So, this is just an aside. We should say that as Jews were having these entire discussions about what it meant to be a Polish king, there was all this kind of interest in the Polish parliament, in popular culture, because it was so exotic. The term Polish parliament came to signify a dysfunctional political system in the 19th century. Am I blocking your view? I'm sorry.
No, your mic is not working.
The mic is not working. Okay, that is a concern. What you've heard before is Vardy's take on this kind of a legend, which means that not only Jews, many people were discussing this concept of Polish nobility. So let's go to the descendants. This is really my favorite. I'm sorry to disappoint you. I really have to move and show some stuff. I can say so much about the descendants, but this is really my favorite part because it becomes increasingly exotic and interesting. One of the descendants of Saul Wahl from Germany, and his name was David Samuel. He moved from Poland to Germany to England, and there he became an agent in Rio de Janeiro, an agent of the Rothschilds. Okay, so he became incredibly wealthy. In 1825, he goes back from Rio de Janeiro to London, and he marries off one daughter to the Rothschilds, and the other daughter, not too shabby, to Montefiore. So, sadly, from a family that imagined himself as nobles, this is a family that is married off to nobles, really. And this person, David Samuel, did two things. First, he was applying for the status of a baron, in Brazil, and he got it in 1854. And he gets this title for Baron, which is interesting. He chooses a new name. He calls himself De Wahl, after Saul Wahl. Now bear in mind, there was not a family called Wahl, right? Saul Katzenellenbogen. But he calls himself De Wahl, which is fascinating. So there is actually now a noble family called De Wahl after Saul Wahl. The other thing he does, which is both beautiful and horrendous, you'll see why horrendous in just a second, is that he sends out letters to rabbis throughout Europe, and he provides them with a transcription of the chunks of Yesh Chilim, which is in his possession, but only the 3 paragraphs which relate to Saul Wahl. So, and he tells them, what do you know about Saul Wahl? Which kind of other testimony do you have? So, bear in mind that what he does is to contaminate the entire, if there were any people that had a distinct or an alternative version of the legend, at this time they were exposed to the actual manuscript. And it is really interesting, but also sad to read this document, this book that he published called The Greatness of Shaul, Blood Shaul, in which he exchanged letters with the rabbis, and he tells them, did you hear about this story? And then he tells them the story, and then some of them say, I didn't hear about it, and some say, yes, of course. Because, why would he say that? Because this is one of the wealthiest men in England. So, and they, he pays them, and he supports all kind of institutions in Poland. So it is one of the most interesting and the least trustworthy sources for this legend, because you know some of these people try to aggrandize the legend, all kind of stuff. So it is interesting, but also just bad for historians. So he's the person who is in charge of that. He's the first Baron de Wahl. And what I like about his story is the fact that Saul Wahl could not have become a noble. He could not have been a noble because Jews did not receive the status of a noble or of a king, obviously, in Poland. Unlike Lithuanians and Scots, Jews were really an exception in that term. But in the 19th century, Jews could become noble. It came together with emancipation. It wasn't so unusual for Jews in Western Europe to become nobles in the 19th century. So together with this slightly larger movement of ennoblement of Jews, the Wahl family, the Katzenellenbogen family, they also become nobles when this is possible, when this possibility is open to Ashkenazi Jews. So this is really not just something internal, but it's something much larger about Jews. There's a lot of interesting thing going on with Saul Wahl in what I would call the genealogical imagination. Because this is an incredibly prominent rabbinic family, which is really worried about its pedigree, there are a great number of people that were actually interested in that, and some of the descendants published books. Let's say there are at least 10 or 12 books out there of these amateur historians who write about the family and how they're related to Saul Wahl. Now, sometimes it's slightly laughable because, some people, there's a person whose name is Edward Geller, who is a descendant of Wahl, is in Oxford as a lawyer, and he publishes all this kind of explanation of how can you get from Saul Wahl to Yehudi Menuhin right there. It's not the most interesting concern, but it's symptomatic to the phenomenon, to Martin Buber. And recently, and this is a decent book about Freud, which show how Freud is connected to Saul Wahl. So, on one hand, this is slightly laughable, right? It's pretentious. On the other hand, this is really a story of what it meant for a rabbinic, prominent dynasty in the Jewish state. Meaning, what happens to rabbinic elite throughout the century. There is a sense of a continuation, and it's not so surprising that there is a connection between Saul Wahl and Freud in the sense that this is a family of wealth that was able to carry on some of its wealth later. I'm not sure it's true to Freud specifically, but it is certainly true to some of the descendants in England and in Italy and in Vienna. So the Fursi, for example. So in this respect, there is something really important and interesting in all this discourse about what it means to be the descendant of Saul Wahl. I'm not an expert on that, but my sense is, along with Rashi or King David or rabbinic authority, Saul Wahl is really prominent in this kind of literature, which is interesting, right? It really is unusual in terms of a Jew who was not famous for his Torah study or scholarship, politics, but really because of this legend. So it's interesting. And then we have Rivlin, right, the Israeli president. And I had this is him in Purim saying, I'm actually the descendant of Saul Wahl. Bear in mind that this is both the president of a Jewish state, who's also a claimant for the Polish throne, right? I don't know when this is going to happen again. So this is funny, but also not funny. I don't think that Rivlin thinks about his political role so seriously as a descendant of Saul Wahl, although he says that often when he goes to Poland. But nowadays in Israel, there is a situation of instability, or a situation of a political regime which is unstable, and Rivlin suddenly does need to be a king for one day and choose who's going to be his next prime minister. And there are also all kind of minorities involved, so in my Israeli mind, maybe there is some relevance to that nowadays in Israel. So, okay, so the takeaway, you've been such a wonderful audience. I'm very thankful for that. We went all the way to 16th century Poland, Liberal Veto and Skarga and all that. So thank you for that. I just want to say, in terms of the takeaway, what's important for me to say is, one, this is not just a legend, but rather a way in which Jews participated in a much larger discourse about the fate of Polish politics. And not only that, the Jews were able to insert themselves and imagine their own political role and political fate within this system. So it really is a very clever way to think about Polish politics. And the other thing is that this whole genealogical discourse says something really important on how Jews thought of themselves in terms of non-Jewish categories of power once Poland was partitioned and once this has become unproblematic. So in this respect, this legend really tells something very meaningful of the ways in which Jews can imagine themselves as royalty, as king. And I'm going to just stop it right now.
Thank you.
Okay, if we have any questions, we have time for a few. So,
Please.
So I was explaining, my cousin Carol and I are first cousins. We're supposedly direct descendants. Our family was of the rabbinical dynasty, and they were from Jerusalem. They came from the Vilna, Grodno, and Kovno area. And I think one of the people from Padua was Treves.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was the very good records were kept, which was surprising because when I look at my mother's side, who were not Lidvox, the records just are all over the place. If
So
we're
you have
lucky to have
full
anything.
documentation of the direct link with Katzenellenbogen family?
Yes, everything in the
I'm not
in the family Katzenellenbogen comes up in our family like all the time.
I'm not surprised. I'm very happy. Let's keep in touch, all Katzenellenbogen. I'm not surprised in the sense that rabbinic families were those who kept their pedigrees. So it actually is, if people are really related to Wahl, and there are many people related to Wahl, it's very easy to prove that.
And also just to say, my great grandfather was the chief Ashkenazi rabbi of Jerusalem.
when?
My father is 99, so this is going back into so the 18. They came in the 18. They left. They were followers of the Gaon of Vilna. They came to Jerusalem to Meir Sharim, which was not the Meir Sharim now, but that's where they lived. And we have many family members in Israel as well.
That is incredible. Did he write about his relationship to Wahl?
Yes, we have. I mean, we have tremendous research.
So I feel like this must be a private conversation after, because this is fascinating. Thanks for sharing that.
Okay.
So I have a question. Saul Wahl was my 13th great grandfather, and I have all the history and everything. I actually have it here on my phone. But I was wondering about something that you had said. You had said at some point that the Katzenellenbogen families were kind of before the girl in class said, you can't treat me this way. I'm a descendant of royalty. Before that, you were saying the Katzenellenbogens were trying to keep it quiet. And I just was that because they were fearful of backlash from the Polish authorities?
So this is my hunch. I don't know that for sure this is something that I'm exploring, but my sense is that for a rabbinic family, this was not so much, it was not a method to be very proud of at some point.
Because it was secular?
Because it was secular, because it was Goyish, because this is not really the model for Jews to be, right? A king, which is, again, it's interesting to me because this is what I see in the letters, and this is in opposition to what historians who haven't seen the archival documents say. So what we would all expect that this would not be the case, but what we see in fact is that Jews are very cautious about it. And I'm going to tell you, because you have this fantastic question, I'm going to be very short about this. There is a third source in Yesh Matchilim about this legend, and this is a story that the author hears from his father when his father is on his deathbed. His father is really dying. He said, you have to come to me one last time, I want to say goodbye. And he says goodbye, and he said, I want to tell you another story. When Saul Wahl, after Saul Wahl died, he had many enemies. And his enemies contacted the Polish king and said, you know, Saul Wahl is a daughter. She's beautiful. Why don't you become a Polish queen? Now, as opposed to a Polish king, a Polish queen is really dangerous. And for a Jewish girl to marry a Polish king and convert and become a queen, this is a whole different set of values, right? It means losing your religion, losing everything. So I think why would the father tell his son that on his deathbed? I think what he tried to convey is don't be too proud and too open about the stories, and don't be too thrilled about hanging out with Poles and all kind of like mixing together. So, you know, there are all kind of concerns out there. So that's
really interesting.
And dangerous. Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Thanks.
Wow. Are you going to be speaking on this topic again? I feel like there's so much more to say, and I want to learn more. Are you going to be speaking anywhere again?
This is an article that I'm publishing, so I can send you the article.
Yes, that would be amazing.
You can all collectively quote my English. That would be fantastic. Please, sir.
When Reuven Rivlin gave that speech, would anybody on the Polish side have known the legend?
Yeah, I hope not to get to yes, sure, okay, fine. Yes, this legend has become famous in Poland in the 19th century because it was translated from Hebrew, from this book, The Case of Shaul, and it attracted a lot of attention from people of all walk of life, but also from anti-Semites. And this legend, I really didn't want to get there, but let's get there. Sure, mostly is being told by anti-Semitic parties. There's actually a card game in which Saul Wahl appears as a figure and says, a Jew may become a king, don't trust him. So yes. It has because this discourse lives on among anti-Semitic circles, but and also in people who are knowledgeable for Jewish history. But mostly, these are the people who know that. If you look it up on Twitter, you can get all kind of discussions of Saul Wahl. Unsavory yet interesting. Thanks for asking that. Yes, please, ma'am.
Okay, I just will tell you a little bit about my history.
Oh,
My
okay.
father's name was Saul Wahl, and come from Krakow, and he told me that story over and over again about, and his version was that the reason they chose a Jew was because these Polish nobles were fighting the different families because they didn't reach, they didn't elect a king on time. So they found an important Jew or a Jew who had a good reputation, and they made him king for one night because they knew a Jew would not claim the crown. He would not try to stay on the
This is
throne.
fantastic. Did you document this legend? So in Israel, there is a center for folklore and legend, and some of this version, which is very precious to me because I hear it first time.
And then also my father used to say that all the Wahls and all the Wahls were actually descendants of this king, because in Hebrew there are no vowels. So therefore the Wahls and the Wahls claimed that they were.
So you're from the Galician Wahl family.
Yeah.
So you're also related to Saul Wahl, the painter. Or maybe you know that. Did your father mention that? There was a 19th century famous Saul Wahl was a painter in
No, that I never.
So that is fantastic. And your father was born in
Krakow.
Krakow. And his parents were from Galicia, right? Okay, so this is the Wahl. Yes, this is the under branch of the Wahl family. Fantastic. So Edward Geller from has collected all kind of information on your family. Are you familiar with his name? Edward Geller. He would know about you. I don't know if you know about him. There's a person in England who collects everything about this Wahl family from Galicia. Edward Geller. Uri Geller, but with Edward. Yeah. So please. Yeah. Oh, Mr. Sill.
No, so I'm not related to but I was just wondering if you could say some more about how you link the fortunes of this myth, right, and whether it was seen positively or negatively, right, to the sort of the weakening of the Polish state and eventually to the partition. say some more about that and about the kind of the timeline, like you gave us that timeline at the beginning, right? About if there's a change in the, this legend being seen positively versus negatively, that's kind of linked, as you said, that's linked to the idea of Polish having a weak central government, and whether that's seen as something that's good for the Jews or bad for the Jews, right?
Right,
So
right,
if you could
that's
just
right.
expand on, yeah.
So what I see is that among this direct branch of the Katzenellenbogen family, this legend is no longer a concern after the partitions. I'm saying concerning the most really manner possible. Pinchas Katzenellenbogen was asked by his father not to go back to Poland. He defies that and go back once, but there was a tradition of not going back to Poland, and this was actually a problem for a rabbinic family that had all kind of connection to Poland. And after the partitions, what I see in the family's letters is that people are open about going back to Poland. I'm yet to see something more, distinctive or something that we can actually cite, but I actually see evidence that they went back. So this is the best kind of connection that I can make in the direct sense around the partitions. Partitions are important for different reasons. Sure. So the partitions are important also in the 20th century when Poland regains independence, and then some of the family members, and then it's become important to them to say, we were the descendants of the Polish kings, or this family in Galicia that this lady here is may be related to, that in the 1880s, Galicia was autonomous from 1848 on, right? And Polish is the official language. So in Galicia, it was important from 1848 on to, present oneself as a descendant of Polish kings. So these are the connections to the partitions I can think of. Yeah, thanks. Please.
On my mother's side, I'm a Katzenellenbogen.
Uh-huh.
And,
Where is your mother from?
well, my mother was born here, and her mother was born here.
Uh-huh.
But we know that from Poland, from a very big family. And my grandmother was next to the youngest of 8. So there wasn't a lot of discussion until much later. People in my generation started getting interested in this. And I can come talk to you later, but I don't know if I have with me a copy of a book that my cousin had that's called The Record of the Katzenellenbogen Family, written by Meyer Ellenbogen, and he gave it to Sam Katzenbogen, who was married to my grandmother. And a lot of what you said is in here. And the part about marrying the daughter, who was very beautiful, what it says in here is that out of fear of what would happen to her, it was such a shanta for her to get married to this person, that he got in touch with a friend of his, an important rabbi who was 90 years old, and said, you have to marry her right away. And he did, and he saved her.
Thanks for sharing that. That's fantastic.
So that,
Married her or got her
No,
married?
got her
Someone else?
married.
Got her married to someone.
to prevent her getting married to this.
Thanks for adding that. It is fair.
And there are things in here I don't even remember. It's so detailed, but it's a thread, and I don't know that anybody's discovered the direct link, although this Meyer Ellenbogen has this whole thing that I will be happy to leave.
I would love to see that. That would be very helpful to me. Yeah.
Whether I'm the descendant of a king or not. I don't think it's changed my life a lot, but my grandmother was very famous as a midwife under the name of Waskowitz. Some of you may know. She delivered most of Brooklyn.
My grandmother was also a midwife at the more important than the king of Queen. This is my dynasty, my royalty.
Okay. All right, thanks very much, everybody. Please check your emails for the forthcoming